What's going on, you guys? This is Tech HD coming at you with a brand new video, and today I want to show you guys how to make your camera into a webcam and use it for gaming and streaming. So if you guys don't know, I've been streaming for a couple years now, not doing it full time or anything like that. I'm going back and forth basically, but I've constantly upgraded from a webcam to a camera, to a DSLR, to a mirrorless camera, and I want to show you guys what you will need to make that happen and exactly what cameras to recommend. So this is going to be a very in-depth video, so if anything I'm going to have the timeline down in the description below so that you guys can go check that out. And I'm going to be recommending camera, what type of camera is necessary, which ones would I recommend for you guys, as well as all the other accessories that you will need like cabling, dummy batteries, and so on and so on. So we're going to dive right into it, and if anything I'll leave a link down in the description below for all the products that I'm talking about as well. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the camera. Now I want to talk about the camera first because this is going to be the most in-depth part that I want to really touch base on. And you guys are using a webcam, you guys are using the very known Logitech C920, the C922, any of the Logitech webcams. Basically I have the Logitech Brio actually right above my monitor. I used to use that a lot for streaming. Now I just use it for unlocking my PC. And you guys want to upgrade now to a camera. You guys want to upgrade to a DSLR or a mirrorless, but there's so many different price points. You got ones from $400 all the way to thousands of dollars. Which one is necessary for you guys? Which one would I recommend for you guys? And as well, we're going to be touching base on lenses as well. But before we get into the camera, I want to talk about the main three things that is very important for a camera, and that is aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. I'm going to try to touch base on this as much as possible and not make it so complex for you guys, but I think that's very important to know in what type of camera would be necessary for you guys and what type of lens as well. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is aperture. Now aperture is the amount of light the camera lets in. So what that means is basically you're going to see numbers on the lens, and what that is basically the lower the number, the more light it lets in, it creates a faster lens. So when you see numbers like 1.8, 1.4, 2.8, stuff like that, that lets in a lot of light, and with that you don't have to mess with the settings so much on the other two things. So we're going to touch base on that as well. But basically you're going to see lenses that offer variable apertures from 3.5 to 5.6, stuff like that. So the lower the number, the more light it lets in. The higher the number, the darker the image is going to be, which means you have to bring down that shutter speed, which means you have to bring up that ISO, and we're going to be touching base on that as well. So what I recommend is having a lens that brings down that aperture as low as possible. On top of that, what aperture does is, since it creates a fast lens, it lets in a lot of light, it also creates that shallow depth of field. What that means is basically it is separating you from the background. It is creating that blurry background that you see on cameras on the iPhones and Samsungs, you know, that portrait style. That's what a lot of streamers and what a lot of people want. So with that being said, you want a low aperture like 1.8, 1.4, 2.8, any of those three. And what that's going to do is create that blurry background, that bokeh, which means you're going to be nice and focused, whereas the background is going to be nice and blurry. So just to let you know, the lower the number, the more it does that shallow depth of field, as well as the more it lets in the light. So that's going to be the more recommended number to do for when you guys are streaming. Alright, the second thing is going to be shutter speed. The shutter speed isn't going to be so important for video because you want it to keep it the same. So shutter speed is how fast, this is mainly for photography, but how fast the camera is taking the shot, and that's going by, you know, seconds and all that. So shutter speed, I usually, for video, it's not that important because you don't want to change it so often. So usually if you are recording at 24 frames per second, you want your shutter speed to be double that. So 24 frames per second, I want it to be 1/50th of a second. If I want it to be 30 frames per second, I want it to be 1/60th of a second. If it's going to be 60 frames per second, I want it to be 1/25 of a second. So just to let you guys know, if you want your frame rate to be this number, you want your shutter speed to be double that. So that's just something very important to know about, and you can't really bring it up and down because that's just going to mess the video quality. It's going to mess some other stuff. It's going to create streaks and other stuff like that. So just leave it like that, just double it depending on the frame rates. I record or I stream at 1080p at 60 frames per second. That's what my gameplay is, and I want my camera to match that as well. So since I'm recording at 1080p at 60 frames, I'm doing 1/25th of a second. So just to let you know about that. And the third thing is going to be ISO. Now ISO is sensitivity of light, and this one is very important because I want to try to break this down and simplify it as much as possible. possible, but basically the lower the ISO number, the less light it allows, and with that it's going to create a cleaner image. The higher the number, the more brighter the image is going to be, but it's going to create a lot more grainy images, a lot of grain. You're going to see a lot of specks, and it's not going to be as clean of an image as possible. So basically, if you've taken night photography with a phone, whether it's an iPhone or a Samsung, you're gonna see that it just creates so much noise, so much grainy images, and that is because the ISO is going really high that the sensor or the camera is not keeping up with it, and it's just not clean image whatsoever. So you want to keep the ISO as low as possible to create the cleanest image. So think of it like brightness basically. The lower the number, the darker it's going to be, but the cleaner the image is going to be. The higher the number, the brighter the image is going to be, but it's not going to be as clean as possible. Alright, so now we talked about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So aperture, you want to keep that as low as possible. Shutter speed, you don't want to mess with that much. And ISO, you want to keep it as low as possible as well. And so basically, now that we touched base on those three things, now we're going to be talking about the camera recommended. So now we're going to be talking about the full frame cameras, crop sensors or APS-C cameras, and micro four thirds cameras. Now a lot of you guys are going to be asking, what's a full frame sensor, what's a crop sensor, what's a micro four thirds sensor, what is a sensor, and what makes it different. Basically, sensor is the larger the sensor, the better the resolution it's going to be, the better in sensitivity of light it's going to be, the better it's going to be with creating that bokeh, that blurry depth of field, that shallow depth of field. And so that is very important for depending on what you want to get. So now we're going to be touching base on full frame sensors. So full frame sensors is the most expensive cameras out there. So let's say, for example, I have the Nikon Z6. This is a full frame camera. This ranges around $2,000. Now, this is not going to be mainly the camera that you guys are going to first get unless you're a photographer or videographer for streaming. This is basically the king of the hill, the top of the tier. This is going to be the one that most people are going to want, but you know, it's very expensive. Not only that, but the lenses are going to be very expensive, but this is the best of the best. So that's one thing to touch base on, is that a full frame sensor is very large. It lets in a lot of light, and it's really good with resolution, but they're also very expensive, as well as the lenses and the other accessories. So unless you're a photographer or a videographer like me, then most of the people aren't going to be investing on this unless you're a full-time streamer and you really want to upgrade it. I know a lot of people that are watching streamers, full-time streamers, they use like a Sony A7, a Canon EOS R, stuff like that. I'm using a Nikon Z6. And that is something to really think about if you guys are going to be really investing in this, and if you guys are going to be really using it for what it's used for. I use it for videos, for YouTube videos, and I'm also a videographer and a photographer outside of YouTube and streaming, but I also use this for streaming as well. So that's why I have a full frame camera. Next thing, it's going to be an APS-C sensor or a crop sensor camera. Now basically what that is, it's a little bit smaller than full frame, and it does a 1.5 crop factor, and we're going to touch base on the crop factors as well when we get into the lenses. But basically, crop sensor camera, it's what the name implies. It's a little bit smaller. It doesn't let that much light in, not that much resolution quality, as well as a blurry depth of field or shallow depth of field, so it's not going to create that much of an effect as well. So APS-C cameras are a lot more affordable. They could range from like $500 to over $1,000, as well as the lenses could be a lot more affordable, but there is that sacrifice of light and resolution and stuff like that. And then we go into micro four thirds cameras. Now micro four thirds cameras are the most affordable cameras, but they sacrifice in resolution, blurry background, shallow depth of field, as well as that light sensitivity. But these are the most affordable cameras. This one is the Panasonic G7. Most of the micro four thirds cameras you're going to see are either Panasonic, Olympus, stuff like that. You're not going to see much of Nikon, Canon, or Sony's in that lineup. So Panasonic G7 is the most affordable one. This ranges for like about $400 with a lens, which is really nice just to get started with, but it is a smaller sensor. So what that is it's not going to let in that much light. You're going to bring that ISO much higher, and then it's not going to be the cleanest image, stuff like that. You're going to have to invest in different lens, that specific lenses, but micro four thirds lenses are a lot more affordable, so that is a pro to that. But just to let you know, this is a micro four thirds camera. You can see the size difference as well. You can see right here the size difference between the Nikon Z6 and the Panasonic G7, and definitely this is much larger, much bigger lenses, much more expensive. $400 on this one. This one's close to $2,000, which is honestly ridiculous. but just to let you guys know, those are the main 3 cameras that I see streamers use: micro four thirds, APS-C, and a full frame camera. Alright, so now we talked about camera and as well as the 3 most important settings when it comes to video: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So we talked about full frame, APS-C, and a micro four thirds camera. Now we're going to be talking about the lenses. The lenses are going to be one of the most important things, and one of the most important things to invest in as well, because usually the lenses that come with the cameras are very cheap. They're kit lenses and they're not going to give you what you really want. So we're going to be talking about prime lenses. The prime lenses are very important. They are the ones that give you that really low aperture like we talked about: 1.8, 1.4, 2.8. They're going to be a little bit more pricey. Some of them are more expensive than others. Of course, the full frame camera lenses are going to be a lot more expensive than the micro four thirds camera lenses, so that's something to think about as well. Now, before we touch base on the lenses, the one thing I want to talk about is the crop factor. Now, there is a crop factor when there is a difference in micro four thirds, APS-C, and a full frame camera. Now, most full frame cameras offer a 1.0 crop factor, which means it's going to use the whole sensor. APS-C crops in a little bit closer. It uses a 1.5 crop factor compared to what a full frame camera does, and a micro four thirds, even worse, it does a 2.0 crop factor, which is even worse. So it's going to be a lot more zoomed in. So if you guys are going to be thinking about getting a lens, consider that. You got to think about the crop factor as well. So let's say, for example, my Nikon Z6. So for my Nikon Z6, this is a 50mm 1.8 lens. This is a 1.8, so it's going to lend a lot of light, and it's going to create that shallow depth of field, that really blurry background that I really love. And it's a 50mm, so it's going to be pretty zoomed in. On an APS-C camera, the comparable to a 50 on a full frame is going to be 35. 35 is going to be the closest because it's a 1.5 crop factor, which means it's going to be close to 50 or a little bit over 50mm. And for a micro four thirds camera, a 25mm, you can see the size difference already. A 25mm 1.7, this is a 25 1.7. This ranges from like around $250. Sometimes I see them at $150. This is over $500, which is crazy of a price difference. But 25 1.7, if you do that, multiply it by 2, that's going to be equivalent to a 50mm on a full frame camera. So just to think about that, if you really want a really wide angle lens on a micro four thirds, you're going to have to go really low, because then it's going to be very not so wide on a full frame camera. Okay, so jumping into lenses, most of the people want a wide angle lens. So what that means is basically covering everything, capturing everything in the scene. Right now I'm using the Panasonic GH5, and that is using a 12mm 1.4 aperture. And what that means is the 12mm is equivalent to 24mm on a full frame camera. 1.4 lets in a lot of light and creates a lot of that blurry background, which is very nice. So if you want a very wide angle lens, then you're gonna want to go below 35mm. And what that means, anything below 35 is considered a wide angle. So a lot of people here 16 to 35s. I usually recommend prime lenses. Prime lenses don't offer any zoom, but it creates that blurry background. It has a lower aperture, which is really good. So this is the 25 1.7 on a micro four thirds camera, and then I have the 50. This isn't considered a wide angle lens, but a 50 is much more narrow, much better on a full frame camera. So if you guys want to capture everything in your background, in your setup, then you're going to want to go lower than 35, and that should be pretty good for you. Same concept goes for an APS-C camera. A lot of people use the Sony a6000, the a6400, so on like that, and you will see lenses around like the 35mm. You do that by 1.5, it's like a 50 on a full frame camera. So if you want to be wide, then you want anything below 35 and you should be good. One thing I do want to remind you guys once again is that even though this is very similar, 25 is considered a 50 on a full frame camera for micro four thirds, this isn't going to offer that much shallow depth of field, that much of that bokeh, that blurry background than what a full frame camera is going to offer. Remember how I talked about the micro four thirds sensors is much smaller, which means it's not going to create that blurry background. It's not going to have that much resolution. That's what I'm talking about. So even though I'm using a 12mm 1.4 on a micro four thirds camera, it's not blurring out the background so much. If I were to use this Nikon Z6 50mm 1.8, this is a 50mm. And if I were to set it to 1.8, it's going to create so much more of a blurry background, so much more of the bokeh. And if you have lights, anything like that, it's going to look so much better on the full frame camera. So think of that if you're going to be investing on the camera. And if you want that blurry background and you get a micro four thirds camera and you get this lens and it doesn't create that much of that blurry background that you were expecting, just think of that it's the sensor, it's not really the lens. Unless you want to go really low like a 1.4, it's still not going to offer that much blurry background compared to an APS-C or a full frame camera like this. Alright, so I hope you guys are still with me, but we talked about a lot of things so far. So we talked about the camera, whether it's a full frame crop sensor or micro four thirds. We talked about the lenses, and we talked about the 3 most important settings: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, to get the best picture quality for streaming. Now we're going to be talking about the accessories and all the things that you will need to hook up your camera into your PC and to turn it into an actual webcam. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the Elgato Cam Link. Now this is a device that connects to HDMI and converts it to USB and makes your camera into a webcam. It makes your PC think that it's an actual webcam, and this is the best way that I found to really connect all your cameras into this and to connect it to your PC. So this is the first thing that's recommended. It's the Elgato Cam Link. They range from about $100 or so. They go a little bit higher every once in a while, but they're roughly a little over $100. But like I said, you connect your camera to HDMI and then you connect it to the Elgato Cam Link, and then this plugs into your PC, and then it's really plug and play. It automatically detects that something is connected, and then through OBS, XSplit, or Streamlabs OBS, you will be able to pull up the camera and you could visually see yourself, and it should work right then and there. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about is the HDMI cable. Now this varies for every camera. So certain cameras take a micro HDMI, other cameras take a mini HDMI, and some of them even take a standard HDMI cable. So what that means is basically you will have to get a camera that's one end HDMI and the other end either being a micro or a mini HDMI cable. I've seen most of the cameras being either one of those two. There are some that are a standard HDMI cable. So like for example, my Panasonic G7, it takes a micro HDMI. So I got the cable that converts micro HDMI to standard HDMI, and then this plugs into the Elgato Cam Link, but this plugs into my G7. You can also get adapters, like for example with my Nikon Z6, I use a mini HDMI to standard HDMI. So this plugs into my Z6, and then the other end plugs into a regular HDMI cable, and then that plugs into the Elgato Cam Link. So when you guys are researching which camera you're going to be getting, research which HDMI port it's using, and then get that cable for that. Alright, the third thing that I'm going to be recommending for you guys is a dummy battery. So for those of you guys that are streaming for 4 hours or more, you don't want your camera to die because it ran out of juice and you guys don't want to buy extra batteries. Usually what I see a lot of streamers use is what's called a dummy battery. What this is that basically it makes it just wall plugged. So you could get the dummy battery. This one's for the Panasonic G7. I plug this into my camera, and then this plugs into the wall, and I'm just getting constant power. I don't have to worry about the battery running out or anything like that. So that's very necessary for those of you guys that are streaming for over like 4 hours, 8 hours, stuff like that, and especially for full-time streamers. So a dummy battery is very necessary. Definitely recommend them. On Amazon they range from like about $30 or so. I have links to the ones that I use. I have one for my G7 and I have one for my Z6, and you could just get the plug and then you could just get different pieces. They usually use the same ones. But yeah, and the last thing I'm going to be recommending, this one is optional, but this one I use so much. This is a wireless remote. So what this is I have the receiver and I have the transmitter, and with this I am able to plug this into my camera, whether it's a Panasonic G7 or my Nikon Z6. The cable is different, so you gotta search up which one you will need. When I have this plugged in, and then when I'm sitting down, I could just point at it and make sure that I'm focused and I'm the one that's focused and that's tracking me. Of course, like there's cameras that have autofocus and stuff like that. Sometimes they're not that good. I just want to make sure I just extend this, plug this in, turn this on, and I focus on it and make sure that I'm actually focused. I'm using it right now on my GH5. So you can see, yep, I'm pressing on it and it's trying to focus, make sure that I'm actually focused and that it's tracking me. This is optional. You know, certain cameras are really good with their focusing, like Sony and Canon, but I just want to make sure, so I usually just buy this, but yep, it's optional. Okay, so now we have all the accessories necessary and we got the camera and the lens necessary for what you want to do. The last thing that I really want to talk about is white balancing. Now, this is the fourth thing from aperture, shutter speed, and ISO that I think is also very important, and I just want to touch base on it. Some people use auto white balance, and that's fine, but sometimes white balancing is very tricky. So what white balancing is basically making sure that the color temperature is as accurate as possible. I've seen a lot of streams where the color temperature is very bluish or very orange type of color, and it looks disgusting. So what I use is a white balance card. or I try to guess the type of lighting that I'm using, I get standard lights that use 5600 kelvins, and that is a certain color temperature that's usually very white. 2300 kelvins is very warm, 9000 is very bluish. So like softbox, usually ring lights like the one behind me is using a 5600 Kelvin. So I just want to set that onto my camera, and that's perfectly fine, and that will create the best color temperature for the skin and the subject and stuff like that. And so sometimes auto white balance, it'll fluctuate, it'll go back and forth, and personally I don't like that, so I want to set my white balance. So I use 5600 on the camera, and that's perfectly fine. Some people use a white balance card, and what that is I have all the lights set up, I have everything all set up. What I do is I go to the settings and I take a picture of the white balance like what I'm doing now, and then what that does is it sets the color temperature to what this is to make it the most accurate. So that's what I did before I started recording, and to get the best color temperature on the skin and all that. So that's another thing that I just wanted to let you guys know. All right, so now that we talked about everything necessary, all the accessories, the camera, the lenses, the settings, all of that, I'm going to be showing you guys actual footage of how it looks like when I'm streaming. And basically I'm going to be showing you guys the Panasonic G7, as well as I'm going to show you guys the Nikon Z6, and you guys are going to see the actual difference on what it does. Alright you guys, so now we are in OBS Studio, and you can see right now I'm using the Panasonic G7 and I have the info displayed. One thing I do want to mention is that you want to make sure that your camera is able to hide all this info. So basically if you go to the settings, you go to HDMI, and then it shows HDMI info, turn it off, and so you will get a clean HDMI signal. Elgato Cam Link has a list of cameras, so I'll leave a link down in the description below so that you guys can go check that out, of all the cameras that already support clean HDMI, or you could do some research and try to find out for yourself. But right now the G7 does do clean HDMI. I just want to show you guys the info. So you can see down here I have it set to 1.7 aperture. I'm recording at 1080p at 60 frames, so that I have the shutter speed set to 125 of a second, and then I have my ISO, which is down there, set to 200 ISO, which is the lowest, which is really good. And then I have the remote, so I could enable and make sure that I'm focused. It's doing auto focusing, but it's doing really good. And then I have my white balance set to 5600 Kelvin because that is what my ring light supports. Also, I do have one light source, which is my ring light, which is very nice. So that's all the settings that I'm using at the moment. And you can see that the background, you can see that the Christmas lights that I have is doing that nice bokeh, that nice blurry background. And I have RGB lights as well, floodlights, and they create a nice blurry background as well. One thing I do want to mention, if you guys want that blurry background, you guys want that shallow depth of field, you do want to make yourself separated from the background. So you want to create as much separation as possible from the background. So if you were against a wall or something like that and you have the settings and you're not getting that blurry background, it's because you're not creating any type of depth, any type of separation. So make sure your setup has that. So for me, like I'm on an L shape, I'm in the corner over here, but my camera is aiming at me, so it's creating a lot of depth, a lot of separation from me in the background, which means it's creating that nice bokeh, that nice blurry background, that nice depth of field, that shallow depth of field. And so like I said, I'm using that remote, I have it connected to HDMI, I'm using OBS Studio. And now what I want to show you guys is if I had the regular kit lens, and this is the 14 to 42 millimeter, and I'm gonna zoom into 25 because that's what the zoom in is on that. 25 1.7, that is equivalent to a 50 millimeter on a full frame camera. So I have it set to 25 there. I'm gonna zoom this into 25, and this is a variable aperture. What that means is that the aperture varies from 3.5 to 5.6. So if I zoom into 25, it's most likely going to be a 4 or 4.5, something like that, which means it's not going to create that much of that blurry background. It should do a little bit of a good job, but I just wanted to show you guys the difference. Alright you guys, so now we are using the 14 to 42 millimeter lens, and I have it set to 25 millimeters, which is very equivalent to this 25 1.7 that I was using earlier, and that is the kit lens that you get with the G7. And you can see right now it looks not bad, but I have it set to 5.3 aperture, which is ridiculous. It's not letting that much light. And then with that, I had to set the ISO to 1600, which is ridiculous as well. So with that, and you can see behind me that the background isn't as blurry as it was at 1.7. And then on top of that, you can see over here in the purplish area, you can see that there's a lot more noise, there's a lot more grain in the video portion of it, so I'm not getting that much of a clean image for video or for streaming basically. Of course you're gonna have the picture much smaller, like to the corner, and then the stream is gonna be there, but I just wanted to show you guys the best possibility, the best possible video quality that you could get, and what I would personally recommend. And if you guys want that blurry background, you're gonna need that aperture at 1.7, 1.8, 2.8, something like that. And you can see 5.3, it doesn't separate me so much from the background. There's a lot more stuff focused in the background, and it's not creating those nice little halo circles, that bokeh with the Christmas lights behind me like I did on the 1.7. So just to show you guys how this lens is and the difference with that 25 1.7. Alright you guys, so now we switched over to the Nikon Z6 using that 50mm 1.8, and you can see that the focal length is very similar to the 25 1.7 on a micro four thirds camera. So just to show you guys that is very similar, and you can see at 1.8 very nice bokeh. Look at that background, look at those Christmas lights, you know, it's creating a nice halo, those circles, and it is really separating me from the background. On top of that, I have it set to 1.8. I have the white balance set to 5600 because it's the same as the ring light color temperature, as well as I have that shutter speed set to 125 of a second because I have it set to 1080p at 60 frames per second, and then that ISO is set to 125. So like I said, full frame cameras let in a lot more light, so I could bring down that ISO much lower. I could bring that aperture as low as possible, 1.8, and it is giving me a very clean image. So you can see very nice bokeh. I'm nice and sharp. I'm the main focus for when I'm streaming, and I got, you know, color lights and all that, and you can see that it is doing a wonderful job. So now what I want to switch over is to a 24-70 f4, and I want to zoom it into 50mm, very similar to what this focal length is, and you guys are going to see when f4 is compared to a 1.8 on a 50mm. Alright you guys, and finally I'm using the 24-70 f4 lens on the Nikon Z6, and I have it zoomed into 50mm, which is very equivalent to match the focal length of the 50 1.8, and I have it's an f4 constant. So what that means is that no matter what zoom I'm going to be in, it's going to stay at f4. And you can see that it's very similar to what the 50 1.8 does, but it doesn't give me that much of that blurry background, that shallow depth of field. So you can see the Christmas lights behind me doesn't create that much of the circle, that bokeh. And also the main thing is that I had to bring up the ISO much higher, so I had it set to f4. You know, the shutter speed is the same. The ISO, I went from 125 to 800, which is crazy. Now you're not gonna see so much of that difference. You're not gonna see so much of the graininess on the sides where the color is in the dark areas like you are on the micro four thirds, since it is a full frame camera, which is really good. But regardless, it's at ISO 800, which is still not going to give me the cleanest image possible. So just to let you guys know, it's still very doable. It's a full frame camera. It's a 24-70 f4. It's still a really good lens. So for anybody that's using this is going to still be a killer setup. F4 creates so much more of a bokeh of that blurry background compared to what a micro four thirds camera could do. So regardless, you're going to do really good. But the next upgrade I would definitely recommend would be a prime lens like this 50 1.8 that offers a 1.8 aperture or something as low as that, so you could get that really blurry background. So there you guys have it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope I covered everything necessary for using a camera for streaming as a webcam, and hopefully we covered a lot of stuff. So hopefully you guys weren't lost in the video, but like I said, you guys could go check back. I have the timeline down in the description below so that you guys could go back and check what does shutter speed, aperture, all that means. But we talked about a lot. So we talked about aperture, shutter speed, ISO, a bit of white balancing. We talked about the camera, full frame, crop sensor, micro four thirds, the lenses, you know, all of that, as well as the accessories, and I showed you guys side-by-side comparisons on how the camera affects the video quality and really what you guys will need. So hopefully you guys understood everything, and hopefully that shows you guys which type of camera you would want, what type of lens you would want, and all the settings necessary for making getting that picture quality that you guys really want. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys do have any questions, like I said, let me know down in the comments below. I will try to respond to any questions necessary, and anything anything particular that you guys want to know, just let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on post notifications so that you guys can know whenever I upload a new video. Follow me on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitch. As always, TechHD. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace!